The sea had no mercy that night, not in the way men speak of storms or ice or depth, but in its silence. A silence so dense it pressed against the eardrums like cotton soaked in oil, muffling even the clatter of my own pulse. I stood at the wireless cabin's narrow porthole aboard HMS Wren, hands still faintly trembling from the last transmission, the ink on my fingers smudged with salt and sweat. Outside, the North Atlantic stretched black and endless, the Convoy SC-122 tusketer in staggered formation like frightened sheep across a field of ink. Somewhere in that void, U-boats prowled beneath the thermocline, listening, waiting, counting our breaths. It was March 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic had reached its ninth. We'd lost 39 ships in the last week alone. I'd heard their final calls crackle through my headphones' voices, fraying like rope under strain, then snapping into static. I was only 23, but already my throat carried the rasp of a man twice my age, worn raw by shouting coordinates into a mouthpiece that never answered back with anything but dread. That evening the wind had shifted. A cold front rolled in from Iceland, dragging fog so thick it curled through the rigging like smoke. I'd just finished lugging a routine contact report, nothing unusual, just the steady thrum of distant escorts on 500 kHz, exchanging call signs in that clipped, coded monotone we'd all come to mimic in our sleep. Then, at 21:17 GMT, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic ping beneath the carrier wave. Not Allied, not ours, to regular, to precise, hydrophone effect. The manual called it the signature of a U-boat's active sonar, probing for hull echoes. My stomach dropped. The nearest escort was over 12 miles astern. SC-122's Commodore had ordered strict WT silence, except for emergencies. Per Admiralty Fleet Order 2412 seconds. To break it was to risk the whole convoy. To paint a target on every merchantman's back, with nothing but our own radio waves. Yet to say nothing, God, the thought coiled in my gut like a live wire. I saw the faces of the Liverpool dockhands who'd loaded those Holstein milk for infants, boots for infantry, fuel for Spitfires that might never take off if this convoy fell. I reached for the key. My fingers hovered. The silence stretched, elastic and cruel. Then a new sound, fainter, higher. The whine of diesels surfacing. One boat, maybe two. They'd found us, and they were arming torpedoes. There was no time for protocol, no time for second thoughts. I flipped the switch, keyed the mic, and spoke not in the crisp, mechanical cadence drilled into every WT operator from Stonehaven to Scapa Flow, but in a voice cracked with exhaustion, trembling on the edge of panic. Wren to all, escorts enemies surfaced, bearing to it, estimated range 8 miles, repeat, U-boats, active in Sector Charlie 7 Convoy. I forced a sob into the transmission, let my breath hitch, as if I'd just scrambled up from a flooded compartment. There, Christ, they're already firing. I cut the transmission short, just as the manual warned never to do, left it hanging, incomplete, desperate. For 3 heartbeats, there was nothing. Then praise or demission, I heard it. The sharp, urgent crackle of HMS Broadway, acknowledging, altering course, ordering depth charges, read it. Within minutes, the entire western flank of SC-122 was veering hard to starboard, engines roaring against the swell. Flares burst overhead, casting long, skeletal shadows across the water. Distant depth charges thundered like drums of judgment. I slumped against the console, my shirt clinging to my back. What had I done? Fabricated an attack, invented panic, violated every tenet of radio discipline. But they'd believed me. Not because the signal was clean, God knew it wasn't, but because my voice broke, and in that fracture they heard truth. I told myself it was necessary, that lives had been saved. But as I stared at the blinking lamps of the receiver, at the silent keys waiting for my next lie or salvation, I felt the first cold sliver of doubt. Had I mimicked fear, or had I finally become it? Dawn came gray and sullen, the kind of light that reveals more than it illuminates. By 6 o'clock, the sea had calmed to a glassy swell. An SC-122 remained of it had regrouped, into a tighter diamond formation. The gaps were 3 Liberty ships, one steamed, now filled only by oil slicks and splintered timber. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of men who might have died because of my voice or lived because of it. The ambiguity was a sickness. The escort commander, Lieutenant Commander Ainsworth, of Broadway, summoned me to the bridge at 8:30. I climbed the ladders with leaden limbs, the smell of burnt coffee and wet wool clinging to the passageways. He stood by the chart table, cap pulled low, his eyes fixed on the plot marked with red pins and penciled arcs. He didn't look up when I entered. "Your transmission last night," he said, voice low, almost conversational. "You reported torpedoes in the water, yet no hits were logged, no explosions observed by any lookout. The U-Batif, there was one vanished before we could get a fix." I swallowed. "I heard diesels, sir, and the hydrophone ping, clear as a church bell at Tournette then. Not angry. Worse measuring, you also sounded like you'd seen a ghost, like you were standing knee-deep in seawater. I was trying to convey urgency, sir, per Article 17 of the WT Emergency Procedures. Article 17 doesn't license theatricality, Ellis," he said, my name without warmth. "The Admiralty doesn't reward improvisation. It punishes Italiano, especially when it causes a convoy to scatter in fog. We nearly collided with Fort Lorraine. Her rudders still jammed from the emergency turn." I said nothing. What could I say? That I'd gambled with doctrine because doctrine had failed us, month after month. That sometimes truth isn't in the signal but in the static between words. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Still, we picked up U-441 on ASDIC an hour later, lurking just outside your bearing. She dived deep, but not before Keppel pinged her at 217 degrees. Close enough. He paused. Too close. Then, almost to himself, "Your voice, it shook like a boy's, but it made them move, faster than any coded burst ever could." He dismissed me with a nod, but the weight didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier, because now I knew they hadn't believed my words. They'd believed my terror, and in this war, terror was becoming a weapon more reliable, perhaps, than sonar or radar. Back in the wireless cabin, I sat before the set, headphones cold against my ears. The routine traffic resumed: weather reports, position checks, convoy status. Updates all clean, precise, sterile. Yet my hands, once steady as a surgeon's, now trembled at the thought of keying a simple R for received. Every transmission felt like a performance, every silence a lie waiting to hatch. 2 nights later, another ping. Fainter, this time, or was it my imagination? Paranoia was the price of my success. I hesitated longer than before. Then, with a dry mouth and a throat that ached with remembered sobs, I leaned into the mic. "Ren to escort's possible contact bearing 198 requests, immediate sweep." This time, I didn't break. I kept my voice level, professional, and no one came. The U-boat struck at 2:14. SS Empire Morn went down in 7 minutes. 43 souls. I heard their last caller. Calm, measured transmission, textbook perfect. No panic, no tremor, and no one believed it. Until it was too late. That was the lesson the sea taught me. Not that lies save lives, but that truth, stripped of feeling, is indistinguishable from silence, and in the vast, indifferent dark between continents, only the broken voice carries far enough to be heard. So I broke again, and again, until I no longer knew where performance ended and soul began, only that as long as my voice cracks at the right moment, someone, somewhere, might live to see another gray dawn, even if I couldn't.